to AFI Fest, presented by Audi. I'm Michael Lumpkin, the director of AFI Festivals. Thank you for joining us for the world premiere of My Psychedelic Love Story, the latest film from Academy Award winner Errol Morris. As we close out the festival, I want to thank those who support AFI Fest. First and foremost, our presenting sponsor for the past 17 years, Audi, all of our many supporters, donors, AFI members, and you, our audience. Thank you for watching this year. Tonight's director was last with us in 2017 with his engrossing 6-part series, Wormwood. Please welcome back to AFI Fest, Errol Morris.
Thank you for having me back.
And talking with Errol tonight is Indiewire Editor-at-Large Anne Thompson. Welcome, Anne.
Thanks for having me. Errol, you have been ahead of the curve all along since Gates of Heaven in 1978. And we talked on the Thin Blue Line way back when.
What curve is this exactly?
You redefine it every time. You've abandoned the Interrotron. You're now into this with Wormwood, which by the way was robbed for an Oscar. With Wormwood, you adopted this whole new system of these multi-cameras, which you're using again on My Psychedelic Love Story. Talk about why you like to do that entire panoply of camera views on your subject.
Part of it is sheer perversity. I like to do things differently. You don't get that many at-bats, if that's the metaphor you want to use. You don't get that many opportunities to make films. And so you should try different things. You should explore different techniques, different possibilities. I used multiple cameras in Wormwood. I actually did use the Interrotron here. One of the cameras, one of the 4 cameras, is an Interrotron camera.
When she's looking directly at the lens?
That would be the one.
Yep.
Yes. And I think it's quite beautiful. I am lucky. I have this extraordinary group of people that I work with. People often say that, but in this instance, it's absolutely true. My cameraman, Igor Martinovic, my editor, Stephen Hathaway, and in this particular film, my graphic designer, Jeremy Landman, who did a really extraordinary job, composer Paul Leonard Morgan, a whole array of really, really talented people.
Well, what strikes me about this, I have to tell you, I'm a child of the 60s. I will confess that I dropped acid in high school. Did you? Did you ever take acid?
I have not, even though I have a son who is very much involved in psychedelics. I was warned. This may come as no surprise, but I started going to psychiatrists at a very early age. And I had a beloved childhood psychiatrist, Doris Millman, who had done experiments on children and psychedelics. And she warned me, she said, this is not for you. Some people who are so close to the edge already probably shouldn't take that kind of risk.
Well, I was thinking,
I didn't.
Joanna, right? I mean, she is such an engaging subject, and this is such a fun, colorful blast from the past. But she's also seductive, and you play around with that. It made me wonder, how often have you ever fallen in love with your subjects?
Probably fall in love with all of them in some way or another.
Even the most dastardly.
Oh, particularly the most dastardly.
Steve Bannon.
Maybe I didn't fall in love with Steve Bannon.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. No, but that wasn't the point. The point is that you are taking us way back, and you're using every tool in your arsenal to make it fun and make it visual and make it rhythmically thrilling. You just, I mean, every reference that she makes, yeah, you're going to drop in Mata Hari, you're going to drop in Goldfinger. You're not going to miss an opportunity. I just haven't seen you have this much fun in a while.
I really do adore Joanna. She's one of my favorite characters. There's something not just endearing, deeply moving about her story for me. It is so much a story about a time and place, but it's a story, among other things, about a doomed love affair. And there's so many elements, of course, that I find compelling. The whole interaction with the justice system, with the law, is certainly part of this story as well. It's hard to imagine, maybe not so hard to imagine it's true, that Leary was arrested on some extraordinarily minor drug offense.
Marijuana, right?
Very small amounts of marijuana, and plunged into a legal nightmare, which could have led to him being imprisoned for decades. In fact, it did lead to him being imprisoned for many, 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 many years. And the offenses were minor, to say the very least.
Well, it was part of the law and order presidency that Trump likes to emulate, the idea of the war on drugs. He was their bad guy, right? Their figurehead, of their target.
Yep. He was the guy to arrest, bring to justice, incarcerate.
And she didn't end up really being with him for that long in real time. Is that true? Did you figure that part out? How long was she actually physically with him?
I would say it's a matter of months rather than years. Most of the time they were together, they weren't together. He was in prison in one place or another. And he was in a place that I actually visited many times, not in connection with Timothy Leary, but Vacaville, one of the nasty prisons in the California system. It's a remarkable story. I've often thought of it. Why do Joanna? Why not do a biopic on Timothy Leary or something of that sort? And my argument is better Rosencrantz and Guildenstern than Hamlet.
Well, how did she come to you? She had written this book, right?
Yes.
How did she reach out to you? It sounds like she came to you.
I believe that she did. And I read the book. I really liked the book. Originally, she wanted my son and myself to both do it together, which we would have, except that my son Hamilton was so heavily engaged in doing his own series. And it's not easy to work in this current climate, to say the least. I mean, he's trying to produce a series while COVID-19 is raging.
Well, you had to finish this movie while COVID-19 was raging, right? Or were you pretty much done?
Fortunately, the interviews with Joanna were done last year. And so they were already in the can. All of the additional work, the graphics, the editing, stuff that could be done here, more or less, or in New York, in various studios, but it didn't require production. It didn't require to go out with a crew, a full crew, and to film more material. We had done it.
So talk about how you and your editor and your graphic designer and all of you, you know, there's this extraordinary dance, this rhythmic dance between what the narrator is saying and what you put on the screen, the way that you edit the images together and the music. But talk about how you do that. If you could give me some examples of what that's like, how you precisely time it out and make it work.
I don't know if anything is precisely timed out.
You have little flashes of things that are seconds long that are cueing us.
Yes. It's all part of the editorial process. And these things slowly take shape. Music gets added, often it gets changed. Visuals are created.
Like the tarot cards.
Like the tarot cards, which have always interested me. I mean, there were so many scenes in this movie. If it were to be done as a traditional drama, there were all of these scenes when Timothy Leary was at Vacaville, who was his next door, I guess you would say, neighbor, was Charles Manson. And that's sort of an incredible story in and of itself. But this tells you what you can and can't do. It's interesting. I mean, I sometimes feel that I shouldn't make documentaries anymore. I should just go on and make drama. But there are things you can do in drama, there's things you can do in these hybrids, and there are things you can do in documentary that you can't do in any other form. And I guess I blushingly confess to still loving this, still loving documentary.
Well, that's absolutely clear. I don't see any reason. Now, Joanna is one of a long series of what I like to call, we've talked about this in the past, unreliable narrators. And
we're all unreliable narrators. I think that's the important thing to remember.
So I'm just curious how much how much do you believe of what she's telling you?
To say that someone is an unreliable narrator doesn't mean that they don't give you a way into the story, a way of seeing the story. Perhaps the more unreliable the narrator is, the more interesting and the greater insight you have into the story that's being told. I believe a lot of what Joanna tells me, particularly the stories about her family, which I think are really, really, really interesting. A kind of an aristocratic Jewish girl who goes on this absurd romantic adventure with one of the major figures of the 20th century, Timothy Leary. Do I believe that part of it is true? Of course I do. Are all of the details true? Maybe not. But
well, how could she remember? I mean, she's addlepated, you know, half the time, and it's just. Oh, we just flew over to this island where the Rolling Stones happened to be recording their next album. I mean, you're just laughing at this literally jet setting lifestyle that they were part of. It's fun to go along for the ride, but at the same time, she wasn't necessarily going to remember everything accurately, I guess, right?
Right. But it is a kind of an amazing jet set story, among other things. I mean, it's got a little bit of everything. It's got drugs, it's got the jet set, it's got Richard Nixon, it has prison.
Well, all right, let's get serious for a second. What do we have to learn from this 70s countercultural story? I mean, the law and order president is back, or temporarily So we hope.
We hope temporarily. I don't know. I don't know whether we learn anything from anything. Maybe that's the cynical side of me. I don't think I tell stories because I think they have some kind of pedagogical significance. You might learn how to conduct your affairs differently as a result of seeing this movie. I think it's a good story and a moving story that a lot of people can identify with.
Absolutely, and part of the perspective that we have now is to perhaps recognize that someone like Allen Ginsberg, or some of the people that were so negative toward her, she lived in a very misogynistic world. I mean, she had agency of a sort, her sexual prowess, and I love seeing that. I love seeing her freedom, but she was also attached to men, you know, who weren't necessarily doing well by her.
This is absolutely correct. It's not a feminist empowerment story.
Although she might think it is.
And maybe for that day and age, it was of sorts. But the world moved on in so many different ways. And who knows what's a feminist empowerment story anymore? Is our new soon-to-be Supreme Court Justice a feminist empowerment story or something else?
Yeah, she belonged to some cult where men are in charge of women. Apparently, yeah. So that tells you something. So Showtime is playing this movie, and is it going to be eligible for the Oscars?
I doubt it, unless they put it in theaters first. I don't think that something that goes on Showtime can be eligible for the Oscars.
Apparently, it can be if it's, and they're going to qualify it. So you're good.
Really? See, this is news to me.
You're good, Errol.
I always assume that I'm going to get shut out in some way.
I mean, you won the one time you got nominated for Fog of War, and that's,
yeah, I was lucky.
What's with the Oscars anyway? Why do you not have a more loving relationship with them?
Don't know.
Happens to a lot of filmmakers.
I feel lucky that I'm working at all. I think of the controversies swirling around the Bannon film and how it was, from my point of view, totally misunderstood. And yeah, I'm surprised.
Is it because the liberals like to stay in their bubble? Is that really what it comes down to? And there was a little bit of that with the Rumsfeld too. They don't want to know. Although the unknown known has become a real phrase that is used across the culture now. You've created a very familiar meme.
Well, Rumsfeld played his own part in that. To me, they were important films to make. I guess this goes back to that whole question of pedagogy. Am I trying to instruct? Maybe a little bit, but I'm trying to learn something myself.
Well, you're afraid to examine the dark side. You've done it many times.
Yeah, I love the dark side, yes, indeed. And I once said, I've never met a pariah I didn't like.
So I wanted to express my my sympathies at the loss of your friend Elsa Dorfman, who was the subject of one of your great movies, The B-Side, and
thank you.
And it's a big loss for you.
And actually, I remain friends with Elsa's husband, Harvey Silverglade. They were two of our closest friends. adored friends. And I'm really thankful I made the movie. It means a lot to Harvey. I don't know how many times he's seen it. It's a way of being reconnected with Elsa. And I'm very proud of the movie. I'm proud of the fact that I did it. I could have just as easily not have done it, but I did it. And I'm glad we did this movie with Joanna, who is not in the best of health either.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
And she is a trooper and a truly romantic character, still to this very day.
All right, so you have the multiple cameras, and then you have the Interrotron, because there are these moments where she takes off her glasses and stares down. You know, it's as if she's a performer. I mean, she knows that when she gets serious and she has to take off her glasses. Or did you have a conversation with her about that?
No, I wouldn't do that.
I
might do that, but I didn't do that. And we're all performers, really. I mean, that whole distinction between documentary and drama does fall apart. Yes, there are differences. They may not be the differences that people imagine are the differences, but in every interview, any interview I've ever done, there's an element of performance, of real performance. And I feel at times I'm eliciting a performance. I'm trying to bring something out that's alive and dramatic.
What was the story of how you first inserted yourself into a movie with your voice, which was back in the day, I think it was The Thin Blue Line, but back in the day it was, back in the day, reenactments were forbidden. You know, you weren't supposed to put yourself in the movie. It's so great how you and the documentary community have broken all those rules, and they're gone.
Not completely gone, but they're going. There are less and less restrictions all the time. And the possibility of experimenting in film, whether it's drama or documentary or whatever it is great. Filmmaking shouldn't be a set of given rules that have to be followed slavishly. It should be an opportunity to do something different every single time.
So tell me about some of the stuff you've been doing with the New York Times and the op-eds, and you still work in commercials and shorts. You have lots of different ways of feeding your creative muse.
Well, I've been writing. I still am writing. I owe another book to Penguin as we speak. I wrote many op-ed pieces for the New York Times.
I love those.
I just wrote two essentially op-ed pieces for The Atlantic. So I'm still at it. I haven't given up on writing. And of course, Wilderness of Error is a book that I wrote about the Jeffrey MacDonald case. And it just recently, within the last couple of days, premiered on FX. And there's a lot that has been written about it. It's another case that really interested me, that has some elements in common with The Thin Blue Line, different case to be sure, but an attempt to really investigate, to examine a murder. So it's very interesting, the reviews. There've been a lot of reviews that have come out in the last week, talk about me and the investigation rather than Mark Smerling, who actually directed the series. And it's interesting. It's interesting to be on the other side of the camera. that was more than worth doing for that reason alone.
Well, you could look back at the Thin Blue Line and you know, the Philip Glass score, the fact that you inserted yourself in the narration, the fact that you were actually involved in investigating a crime and getting somebody off of death row. I mean, these are all things that have been pursued more avidly in the years since, and have become incredibly popular as a kind of documentary form. You're very much an influencer, Errol. And we're very grateful that you still are doing this great work. And thank you again for this one. My second.
I'm really grateful that I'm still being interviewed by you. You look great.
Thank you. We will continue, both of us. And,
Yes.
And I want to thank everybody at AFI for watching. And
Likewise, thank you, AFI.
bye-bye, Errol.
Okay, thank you.